Good evening. Let's go ahead and turn to 2 Kings chapter 20. 2 Kings chapter 20. That's where we're going to pick up tonight. So, we are in a different Bible period than we started in. And what Bible period are we in now? We're in Judah alone. So, not really focused on Israel at this point. We're focused on Judah alone. Imagine that. Who specifically would be our main focus in Judah at this point? King Hezekiah. That's right. So, King Hezekiah, what do we know about him? Very good king. How were things with the people in his days? Good, right? People are faithful to the Lord. How are things prosperity-wise in his days? They're good. Is everything perfect in his days? No, right? So what are some of the things maybe we talked about last time that were not perfect? Yeah. That's right. So Syria was coming in and they were trying to take Jerusalem, Judah and Jerusalem. They had taken Israel, and I think we mentioned that they were like on a march down to Egypt, and they're just kind of taking people out along the way. Judah's next on the list. So that's not great. But how does it turn out?
Turns out great.
Turns out very good. So what? Well, why does it turn out very good? Because they had faith in the Lord, right? Now, there may be some things we question along the way as far as that goes, but what we see ultimately is they put their faith in the Lord. And they say, Lord, we're going to let you handle the situation. He does. So when we open up in 20, it's going to be interesting. I think there will be some things tonight that we might have questions on, and I don't think I'm going to have all the answers to them. But I think we'll be able to get certain things from this. And like I said, there may be a couple points where we're not quite sure what's going on. But when we open up in 20, we kind of have, in some ways, a different tone for Hezekiah than maybe we have had most of the rest of the time. Most of the rest of the time, it's like we talked about, he's prospered, things like that. And we've seen that in multiple ways, right? We've seen prosperity in wealth. We've seen prosperity in protection. And we're going to get just a little bit different tone here. So let's look at the first three verses here. It says, in those days, Hezekiah became sick and was at the point of death. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came to him and said to him, thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die. You shall not recover. Then Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying, now, O Lord, please remember how I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart, and have done what is good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. All right, so we open up here. Things are not as good for Hezekiah. So what's the situation? Sick. What kind of sick? Yeah, like terminal, right? This is going to be the end. And if he wasn't sure of it already, how can he be sure of it? Yes. Isaiah tells him he's not just any old prophet, right? He's God's prophet. Tells him you're going to die. Well, how does he take it? Yes. About as well as you'd expect, probably, right? You're not probably happy about it. Now, what's interesting is, does he take this news and does he just wallow in self-pity, or does he take this news and become angry and bitter, like toward God? Turns and prays God. What are some of the appeals he makes? Because that's what this is, right? This is an appeal. What are some of the appeals he makes to God? I've been faithful. Say what? I walk before you in truth, and I've done what's right. So you know my heart belongs to you, my actions belong to you. And I think, he hasn't necessarily said this, but I think we could tack on the idea of like, I've led the people in this as well, right? I've led the people in this as well. And so what we see is kind of this complete picture of, I've tried to do what's right. I've tried to do what's right. Please take note of that. But right now he's very sorrowful. So I think that's interesting that we have, Hezekiah here. Horrible news. But what he does is what we've seen him do in the last chapter. So when he was faced with the verse in the last chapter, when Assyria came, where did he go? Turn to God, right? So we see he went to the temple. He went to Isaiah. He laid the scroll out before the Lord. He went to God. And the same thing's happening here. So we'll see how it turns out. But we see the same kind of pattern repeated in Hezekiah, that his heart does belong to the Lord. He does turn to the Lord. Anything to say about that?
And according to this prayer, what is, at this point, through this prayer, what is Hezekiah asking for?
For the Lord to remember.
To remember him. That's all he's asking for at this point in time. You know, remember me. Remember how faithful I've been to you, how true my heart has been towards you. So, you know, he's not asking for anything specific. You know, he's not asking for what he's about to receive.
Right.
He's just asking, remember. Remember how I've lived and walked in your ways.
That's right. Now, you might think something like this, I guess, could come across as selfish, right? Remember what I've done. But does that seem to be the way God takes it? It doesn't, right? And I think God would be a pretty good judge of how it's meant. So you look at verse 4 there. If you want to read 4 through 7, or if you don't want to read them out.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
And before Isaiah had gone out of the middle court, the word of the Lord came to him. Turn back and say to Hezekiah, the leader of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of David, your father, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Behold, I will heal you. And on the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord, and I will add 15 years to your life. I will deliver you and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And Isaiah said, bring a cake of figs and let them take it and lay it on the bowl that he may recover.
All right. So, makes a petition to the Lord. Does the Lord listen? Yeah. How quickly? Like immediately, right? So before Isaiah can actually leave, he's told, go back in and tell Hezekiah this. And what is he told to tell Hezekiah?
He's going to heal him more years to us.
That's right. He's going to heal him. He's going to have 15 more years. And then he also said, I like what he says kind of leading up to that. He says, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. And behold, I will heal you. So we talked about last time, Hezekiah, whenever he laid out the scroll, whenever he would go to God and petition, he's like, do you hear God? Do you see God? And one of the first things he said was, I've heard you. And then what he says here is, I've heard you. And so what we see with Hezekiah is you have a faithful man. And we see God listens, right? God hears faithful people. Unfaithful ones, he might hear. Depends on their heart and how they're asking. But faithful ones, he hears. And maybe do you want to take verse 6? You're explaining verse 6, I thought, very well.
Well, when you look at this, he says he adds 15 years to his life. And why does he do that? What else does he add to that as far as God? Why does he do this? Yeah.
He mentions that back in 19 and verse 34, he says the very same thing.
Mm-hmm. And also what Rita was saying there. Now, did we not already cover that in the previous chapter? I'm thinking we're backtracking a little bit with this story. I'm thinking it happens in the same year, the 14th year. You think about this, and how old is Hezekiah when he becomes king? Anybody remember? 25. He's 25. So, and I think he dies at age 54. He's extended 15 years of life at this point in time. So subtract 15 from 54, and that would make him 39. So if he started his reign at 25, this would be the 14th year of his reign. What happened in the 14th year of his reign? Sennacherib, you remember, Assyria came and was at the door, what we just went over. So I think this story is backtracking just, maybe a few months, just a short period of time, just before that event took place, is where the setting of this story is taking place.
Yeah, and that would make sense because you're talking about, we see this in a couple of places. It talks about he reigns 29 years, right? So the 14th year you have Sennacherib come, he gets 15 more years here. 29 years. So that math, that works out. So when we get to, I think, let's see, we got to verse 7. Now, I don't know exactly what to make of verse, let me say verse 6. I meant to say this earlier. Gerald pointed out it was for his own name's sake and for the sake of David. So if we remember, those were the things that appealed to God in that situation with Assyria, right? So what Hezekiah did in that situation with Assyria is like, look, we want to show the nations who you are. It was an appeal on his name and on who he was and how he appeared. And then what we see is God answers that, right? And so he says here, for my own sake, we see him have the same viewpoint about it. So I think when you're talking there about this being the situation with Assyria, I think it lines up in a lot of thematic ways at the very least. Even if it's not maybe chronologically written down the way we'd expect, I think thematically it makes sense.
Yeah, and we have no other record of any kind of other altercations with Assyria. You know, this one that we had covered last class was the only one that we have any record of.
All right. So then let's look at verses 8 through 11 here. So it says, and Hezekiah said to Isaiah, so again, he's told he's going to have 15 more years. What shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord on the third day? And Isaiah said, this shall be the sign for you, or to you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has promised. Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps, or go back 10 steps? And Hezekiah answered, it is an easy thing for the shadow to go to lengthen 10 steps. Rather let the shadow go back 10 steps. And Isaiah the prophet called to the Lord, and he brought the shadow back 10 steps, by which it had gone down on the steps of Ahaz. All right, so this is interesting. He wants a sign. I don't know exactly why he's asking for a sign here.
Well, I mean, he's on the brink of death. Mm-hmm. And in 3 days, he's going to enter the house of the Lord.
Right.
So, things are going to have to turn about pretty quick for that to be accomplished. And of course, we know his father, Ahaz, you remember Isaiah offered him a sign, and how did he respond to that?
I won't test the Lord.
I won't test the Lord. But I mean, we've seen men of God, ask for something. Gideon, other people, or that one was suggested to Gideon, I think. Was it not?
With the fleece?
Yeah, with the fleece.
I don't remember. Maybe it was.
But it wasn't like a lack of faith. I don't think it was anything like that. But it was something that God often done to men of God to prove, to really give that confirmation that this is going to take place, and you can have confidence in it.
The connection with Ahaz is an interesting one. Mm-hmm. How his father doesn't, he's told, ask for a sign. He's like, oh, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And maybe Hezekiah's like, I'm not going to make the same mistake.
Right.
I'll ask for a sign just to make sure this is going to be true. So the sign is either the sun can go forward 10 steps or back 10 steps. Now, from my understanding here, so it talks about the steps of Ahaz, and this is like a sundial kind of thing. So when it's talking about the going forward 10 steps, what does that mean?
Just a daily progression of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right, maybe just sped up, right? Maybe you're speeding it up. But it's kind of working the way you expect it. The sun's going the way you expect it to go. But then if you're going back 10 steps, what does that mean? Maybe not, I don't know, back in time maybe, but at least the order of things, the way things are oriented is being reversed for a while. And so it's funny, Hezekiah says, that's an easy thing for it to go forward 10 steps. It's like, well, yeah. Maybe, I don't know.
That's what it does every day, doesn't it?
It's like, I don't know if a step is an hour, but it's like, yeah, I mean, it does it in 10 hours, but if it's hours.
Yeah.
But he's like, well, let's make it go back. It's like, well, that would be a wonder, wouldn't it? And then Isaiah prays, and what happens? And it goes back. So there are pretty amazing things happening in Hezekiah's time. There's some pretty amazing things that are within the control of the people. So what Hezekiah does, what the people do, those are pretty amazing things, that things are being turned around so quick. But there's some pretty amazing things that are out of control of the people. So 185,000 of the Assyrians in one night being taken out, that's not in the control of the people. And yet it happens. Here, you have the sun going backward. That's not in control of the people. Yet it happens. So these pretty amazing signs happening in the time of Hezekiah. And you have to imagine this is not a coincidence with the type of man Hezekiah is. You imagine amazing things happening with an amazing righteous leader like Hezekiah.
This is one of the, you brought up calling this a sign, and it is a sign. Typically, the Bible uses that terminology, signs and wonders. Is this anything out of the ordinary from like what we would see today? I mean, in other words, what would it take for this to, as we know, how the cosmos and everything works, our galaxy and solar system, what would have to take place for this to happen?
Turn the other direction.
Exactly. The earth would have to stop spinning the direction it turns and go the other way. So what I'm trying to point out is that when the Bible talks about signs and wonders, it's talking about things on a whole nother level from the way the natural world typically operates. I've had people tell me, well, the birth of a child, that's a miracle. Well, it happens every day. I mean, it's extraordinary. And, I witnessed both mine and it was extraordinary, but it happens every day.
You're not saying it's no big deal.
No, I'm not saying at all it's not a big deal. No, not at all. Especially y'all women, man. God bless y'all. But absolutely. I mean, we're talking about things that, don't happen. Never happen, really, except for on an extreme situation like this.
And you'd have to imagine, I mean, this can't just be noticed by Hezekiah, right? This is going to be something that's noticed all over. And this is a wonder that people are going to notice all over. We're amazed by a solar eclipse. And it's like, that's going to happen. We can predict and that's going to happen. It's like, this is, even more than that. This is pretty incredible and not expected. So you can imagine the awe of the people at that time.
Absolutely.
This would be a great sign.
A great sign.
Mm-hmm. All right. You want to take the next few verses there? In 12, start at 12.
All right. At that time, I didn't look this word up. Did you?
So I would say Merodach Baladan.
Okay, Merodach Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent envoys with letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he heard that Hezekiah had been sick. And Hezekiah welcomed them, and he showed them all his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious oils, his armory, all that was found in his storehouses. There was nothing in his house or in all his realm that Hezekiah did not show them. So we might stop right there and just, delve there for a moment. So Hezekiah has recovered. And up to this point, how would you describe Hezekiah? Yeah, I think he's been very humble, up to this point. Very humble, reliant upon God. God has been his anchor. Anytime he faced adversity, that's the first place he would go. But go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the beginning, when it was describing kind of the overview of his reign, talks about how he was like David. That's exactly right.
Why would he do such a thing as this? Why would he entertain strangers, you think? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think in, let's see, verse...
You're talking about 31, maybe?
Yeah, I was looking at 2 Chronicles account where it said that his heart was
is it
lifted up.
Chronicles 32, 31 possibly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, God had left him to himself, Chronicles account tells us, in order to test him, to know all that was in his heart. And so here is an occasion where he leaves Hezekiah to himself, and for whatever reason, I don't know if this is just a weak point in Hezekiah's life or what, but when you think about Hezekiah, does he have anything to be proud of? What is the situation there in Jerusalem financially? I mean, yeah, very well. It described all the storehouses of silver, of gold, of spices, all these different, his precious oils, his armory. So he's truly living in a land of plenty. He has a lot to offer, and those type of things, when you have a lot, sometimes they give us a false sense of security and may puff us up a little bit.
Yeah, you actually made me think of verse 25. I think I gave you the wrong one. But Hezekiah did not return according to the benefit done to him, for his heart was proud.
That's it.
So
That's it. Yep. Yep. So yes, his heart is proud here on this occasion, and he exposes himself. Now, Babylon, who is Babylon? I mean, they're nobody. So you think Hezekiah viewed them as any kind of threat, or? I don't think he did. I don't think he did. He saw them as a not even a blip on the radar. So what harm?
Or if anything, maybe an ally. So
Perhaps.
we had talked about, it seems like at this point, Babylon is resisting Assyria. Well, who's the other one to resist Assyria at this point? Judah, right? And in fact, Judah has successfully resisted Assyria. So it talks here about how he comes to check on Hezekiah during his sickness, but it may have been like a dual meaning, or not meaning, but a meeting in this, where he's coming to meet him because of the sickness, but also coming to meet him because he could be an ally against Assyria. And so maybe that's something going on here as well.
Trying to figure out what his strengths are to be able to overcome Assyria the way Hezekiah did.
And that may be why Hezekiah's like, well, look at all that we have to offer, right? Mm-hmm. Look at all that we were able to keep from Assyria and things like that.
And you think about the opportunity this situation could have created. I mean, when you remember when Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, what did he pray for? One of the things he prayed for was that if God would uphold Jerusalem, what would it tell the world?
How powerful God is.
Exactly. And think about, he has an opportunity here to share that very same message with foreigners and tell them about Jehovah and how great Jehovah is. But he doesn't seem to do that.
All right. Anything y'all want to say about that before we get into 14 here? All right. So in 14, you might think that this in some ways goes unnoticed, but it doesn't. Then Isaiah the prophet came to King Hezekiah and said to him, "What do these men say? And from where do they come to you?" And Hezekiah said, "They have come from a far country, from Babylon." He said, "What have they seen in your house?" And Hezekiah answered, "They have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing in my storehouses I did not show them." Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. As some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." So we'll pause a second on that. You might think this is not a big deal. You might think it's not a big deal. Like, what did he do here? Like, what action did he take that was like really wrong? It's like, well, maybe in some ways the thing that he did itself was not a wrong thing. But it might have been the attitude behind it. What had Hezekiah been so good about throughout all his reign? Humility, trusting in the Lord, giving God the credit. And yet here it seems to kind of seems to be the opposite, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He's showing off. Look what we have. Look what we have. And so there are consequences to this. And what we see here is, and I think what we get here is a good example of to whom much is given, much is required. And so he's been given a lot. And he misuses it here. And I think there's going to be consequences for this that he did not foresee. And you said he might have viewed this as an insignificant nation. Like, what is it going to matter if I do this? Well, it's going to matter because what's going to happen to all this stuff that he may be proud of? By who? The people he showed it to, right? Talk about irony here. But that's not all, right? It's not just the riches. What else? His sons. So you have the stuff you're so proud of is going to be taken by Babylon, but then it goes a step further, right? You need to understand the severity of this. This is how far it's going to go. Now, you have anything you want to say about that? First, Hezekiah's reaction to this is very interesting.
Yeah.
What does he do?
He said, "Oh
God, he holds his peace, right? He holds his peace, and he says, "What the word of the Lord that has spoken is good." And we get actually some insight here, where he thought, why not? if there will be peace and security in my days. Now again, I told you earlier, it was like there'll be some questions I'm not going to know the answers to. This is going to be one of those where it's like, I don't know exactly why he's thinking this.
Yeah, I don't understand that phrase either. There, what he says there, the word of the Lord that you have spoken is good. I could look at that and say, well, his humility is returned back to him, and he's accepting rebuke that Isaiah is delivering to him from the Lord. But this here, this one's a little bit harder to digest.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, I don't know if he's looking at it. I don't know if it's still a selfish attitude. Maybe. I don't know if he's saying, well, look, if my son is righteous, then everything will be fine in their days too. So I can only control what's going on in my days. Maybe. Or maybe he knows, well, I don't think he can know at this point, actually, because I was going to say, maybe he knows what kind of king's coming up next, and it's not going to be good then. But he can't, because this is 15 years until, it's a little bit spoiler here, right? So it's going to be 15 years before his reign ends, but when his son starts to reign, he's 12. So that can't be the case yet. So it's just one of those maybe statements where I don't have a good answer for it, but it is what he said, and it's recorded. So then we kind of get a wrap up here on Hezekiah. What does it sum up with Hezekiah here?
What he did as far as the city goes, nothing else that was like God.
That's right. So it says he did other things. I'm just going to point this out, and you'll see this with several kings. But most of the things that we see with Hezekiah have to do with his relationship with the Lord. He does other things, right? He rebuilds and does other things like that. It spends very little time on those subjects with what he does as far as the nation is concerned, like rebuilding things and whatnot. But it spends a lot of time on his relationship with the Lord and how he reformed the people and their relationship with the Lord. It spends a lot of time on that. So I just want to make that point here. I don't know if it's a huge point, but it is something interesting to note. It's like, oh, he did other things, and it's recorded somewhere else. But we're focused on what he did in his relationship with the Lord.
And it does close out in 2 Chronicles by saying that he was buried in the upper part of the tombs with the sons of David. Mm-hmm. And all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem did honor him at his death. So he was beloved and he was honored at his death.
And we pretty much only see that with righteous kings.
Right.
So that is worth being noted, is that if you're going to be buried with David, and if you're going to be honored by the people, that pretty much only happens with righteous kings. At least as far as this is recorded. All right. Well, who do we have coming up next? We got Manasseh next. We love Manasseh. Not. All right. So
well, he had a good father, so surely we're going to have another good king.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
So, because that's what happened with Hezekiah's father, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is interesting. So we had Uzziah, good. Jotham, good, right? Then we have Ahaz, not good at all. Then we flip over to Hezekiah, great. And so it's like, what's going to happen here? Well, we get a pretty quick recap on this, or preview of this. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 55, not 25, years in Jerusalem. His mother's...
Well, he could have only wished it had only been 25.
He reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. All right, so a couple things. This happens from time to time. We get kind of a summary statement, right? How was he? Bad. Evil. And then we get a comparison, right? So this happens a lot with kings. You get a summary statement and you get a comparison. So Hezekiah's summary statement was, he was good, like David, right? Comparison. So what's the comparison for Manasseh here?
Worst.
Yes.
Didn't I read somewhere it said no one was ever as bad as this one?
Mm-hmm.
I think I read that.
That's right. Yeah. So he practiced things that no king had ever practiced as far as evil goes. So he's compared to the Canaanites. So you're talking about undoing what Hezekiah did. You're talking about like undoing the whole conquest, right? You're going all the way back. And is it okay if we read through 9, just kind of reading?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, how often, of course, you've been in class this time around. I've skipped a lot of it, but how often is the mother mentioned amongst the kings?
We know it was with Hezekiah. And it might be the mother's mentioned because it's like, well, Hezekiah's not the way he was because of his father Ahaz, right? Maybe because of his mother. And then here, possibly the same.
Maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe her influence was what
Could be.
took him down the wrong.
Years old, you know, he had an older person that was kind of
Right.
Mentoring him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so when we get in verse 3, we're starting to see some of the things he did. For he rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah's father had destroyed. He erected altars for Baal and made Asherah, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem I will put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. And he burned his son as an offering and used fortune-telling and omens and dealt with mediums and with necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. And the carved image of the Asherah that he had made, he set in the house of the Lord, set in the house of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not cause the feet of Israel to wander any more out of the land that I gave to their fathers, if only they will be careful to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. But they did not listen. And Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done, whom the Lord destroyed through the people of Israel. Boy, we just have a laundry list of horrible things. So you have idol worship, which we've seen before. But you have actually a mix of idol worship here, right? So you have idol worship that the Israelites practiced, like Ahab Israelites practiced. And you have him going back to like Canaanite worship. And then you have him practicing child sacrifice in this. And then you have him, it even mentions this, I like it, says this, but it's like he makes these altars, like rebuilds the altars that his father had broken down, right? So what you had with Ahaz is he had these altars. Hezekiah comes in, knocks them down, says, we're not doing that. He's going to undo what his father did. And then his son comes back and redoes it. And so we have that going back. And then we also have, which I don't know how often this is mentioned, but we have with the mediums and the necromancers, I don't think that's mentioned very often at all with kings.
You know, necromancer is not a term I hear very often unless I watch The Hobbit.
Yeah, that's right. But but it is here, and I think that's when it's talking about he did according to the practices of those who were in the land before the Israelites. I think this is some of that, right? Because you remember the first king, what did Saul really try to do? Get rid of the mediums and necromancers, right? And he ended up later in his life, at the very end of his life, going to the medium, but he really tried to snuff it out. And it doesn't seem to be that prevalent throughout, but Manasseh brings it back. Now, what you see here is apparently there is, and we'll talk more about this too, but there is an outreach to Manasseh and to the people. But what we see in verse 9 is that very successful? No, it's not. But I also think verse 9 is discouraging, not only because they're not listening, but because of what it shows with Manasseh here. So, remember how we talked about Hezekiah? I mentioned Hezekiah was like a great leader. He was not only a great person himself, but he was able to get the people, able to convince the people this is what we ought to do, and he led them in the right direction. Guess who else is an effective leader? Manasseh. He's effective, but not in a good way. Because he leads his people to do more evil than the nations had done that the Lord destroyed. So the Canaanites we're trying to get out of here, he did more evil than them. And he caused the people to do that as well. So he's effective as well. He's like his daddy as far as that goes. But he's using it for wrong.
So what does this say about national leadership, the influence that it has on the people?
Well, it can have a lot or it can have a little. Because, so like what we saw we mentioned this with Uzziah and Jotham is like they were good, but the people still worshipped on the high places.
That's true.
And so I
Of
think
course, they didn't go to the extent that Hezekiah did
Right.
to tear them all down.
that's right. And so that's what I'm saying is like it can have a great influence, right? When you have someone who's fully committed and says, and they're in a leadership position, they're saying, we're going to be fully committed, it can have a great effect. But then you can have someone who is good themselves, but if they're not committed to bringing everybody else in, then they probably won't be.
Right.
And so,
So, and that's even for these idols that he resurrected or whatever, in the
Mhm.
actual temple and courtyard itself.
yes.
Which seems to be even worse than.
Yeah. That would be an abomination.
Yes.
I mean, you talking about, going all in on this. He was all in. And even, the child sacrifice, verse 6, it says that he burned his son. So, I mean, it wasn't just, he was allowing this to take place. He was involved directly with this.
Yeah, he's commanding it, at least for sure. But like you are both mentioning here, like, these things are the kinds of acts that are in your face, right? So horrific acts in sacrificing your son. Like basically spitting in the face of God, saying like, we're going to use your place for someone else. And then spitting in the face of his father and saying, look, these things that you got rid of, I'm going to bring them back. It's just really a really bad time right now.
And it almost seems that, what Rita was bringing up, it's almost as if Manasseh's determined to really erase his father's history. You know what I'm saying? Where he built the temple back up, restored temple worship, did everything he could to restore the name of the Lord. Manasseh is just determined to try to erase all that as much as he can.
Why was he doing that?
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
We talked about his mom. Maybe
It's hard to
his mom
say.
was in that way. Could be. And we may get an answer to that, maybe not tonight, but maybe another time we'll get an answer to some of that. But we see that sometimes with evil kings, is they'll reign longer than a good king will reign. We may have that question of like, why does this happen? I think it'd go back to the idea of, well, God sends rain on the just and the unjust. It's like there are times where God will take action and punish injustice, and there are times where he lets things play out. And maybe, and like I think we'll see in the case of Manasseh, when he lets things play out, it might be a case of mercy, and where he's giving multiple, which is what we saw with Israel too. Like, the nation of Israel is like he let them exist for a long time, and they were always evil.
Mm-hmm.
And before he took them away,
And some of those kings, ruled for a very short time, very, very short time
yes, in Israel,
in Israel. Yeah,
God is patient.
that's right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right,
Like a mom.
like what?
Like a mom. He's next.
Oh yes,
Was it 2 years?
Mm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were saying something else, but okay. I thought you said like a mom, and I was like, I guess moms can be awesome.
I don't know how to pronounce his name. But
Yeah.
We don't either.
All right, let's go ahead and read through verse 16 now, so we have time to talk about that. And the Lord said by his servants, the prophets, because Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these abominations and has done things more evil than all the Amorites did who were before him, and has made Judah also to sin with his idols. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Well, first of all, let's pause. How do you think this is going to go? Not a good lead up, right? Behold, I am bringing upon Jerusalem and Judah such disaster that the ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the measuring line of Samaria. That measuring line of Samaria, how did that go for Samaria?
Not well.
Yeah, not well, right? Like, if we remember, they were wiped out, like they were taken away. That's the measuring line he's bringing. And the plumb line on the house of Ahab. And by the way, what happened to the house of Ahab? Wiped out, right?
Mhm.
And I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. I think the idea there, I know we're not done yet, but I think the idea there is like we're wiping them off, we're turning over, not looking at it anymore. And I'll forsake the remnant of my heritage and give them into the hand of their enemies, and they shall become a prey and a spoil to all their enemies, because they have done what is evil in my sight and provoked me to anger since the day their fathers came out of Egypt, even to this day. So you have this judgment proclaimed, and again, and this happens often with prophecies, but it's like it begins and ends with why this is happening. So because you've done this, here's what's going to happen because you've done this. He's trying to, with this harsh sentence, but he's trying to remind them, it's a harsh sentence because you've done horrible things. You've been extremely unfaithful. You've been extremely evil. And again, we see some comparisons here. We see comparisons between the Amorites. Well, how did they compare to the Amorites?
More evil.
Worse, right? And then, so that's this is what you've done part of it. And then he makes other comparisons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare you to Israel. I'm going to compare you to the house of Ahab. It's like, because of who you compare to, I'm going to treat you like the ones I've judged in the past. And we're going to take care of this.
You know, I think about, did God ever establish his name with the Amorites? Did he ever establish his name with any of the Canaanites? And yet, Judah is being compared to them and is worse. Is worse than they ever were. And God established his name with Judah. You know, he gave them the law. He gave them the prophets. How much warning have they had about the path they're going down up to this point? You know, prophet after prophet after prophet. And yet they have the attitude, well, you know, we have the temple. You know, we're protected. God's confined to this space. We can't be defeated.
Yeah. And I know he wasn't alive to see this, but it's like the generation is still alive that saw Israel get taken away.
Yep.
And it doesn't seem to have the effect you hope it would have on that.
You know, I guess when your heart turns away, you know, to such a degree that these people have, you know, the level of depravity that they've entered into, it's hard to ever see light again. The level of darkness that these people are living in at this point in time.
Yeah. And I don't know this, but I imagine, you know, we talked about all the wealth that Hezekiah had. I imagine that's still accessible to the people. And so you're talking about they may be in these depths and think things are going okay.
Things are going good, just like Jeroboam II during those days.
That's right.
Things are going good. Why would we want to change? Everything's going great.
That's right.
That's a good point.
And so look at verse 16 here. Moreover, Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to another. Besides the sin, he made Judah sin. So they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So again, you just have very condemning language here. So we're talking about the extent of his atrocities. It talks about the blood filling Jerusalem from one end to another. That's a lot. And it talks about the sin that he made the people to sin. So, I mean, again, it's not the kind, I think it's the kind of thing where it's like, even if initially it may have been started by the people, he's the one spearheading it now. And he's making the people do this, right? Well, this is how we're going to worship. And we have a minute left, so I think I'm going to say this. In the account that we have here in 2 Kings, you'll notice the next couple of verses wrap up his story. So what's the impression we're left with in Manasseh if we're just reading 2 Kings?
He's evil and he's led the people away.
He's evil and he's led his people away. It's horrible. Horrible picture. Now, next time, we're going to cover the second half of his story. Not recorded in 2 Kings, but recorded in 2 Chronicles. And we're going to look at that and we're going to see how it turns out. Because, I don't know, a lot of times you might have slight alterations in how people act in their reign, but not very drastic ones.
Yeah.
And we're going to see something like that with Manasseh.
He goes from extreme to extreme, doesn't he?
Extreme to extreme. All right. Thank y'all.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.